My fiancé refused to let my parents attend our wedding even though they were paying for it. I, 35F, got engaged to my fiancé, Benjamin, 30 meters, a couple of months ago after dating for 2 years. I've built a successful career as a senior product manager at a major tech company in Sunnyvale, managing a team of 15 developers working on AI integration projects. Ben runs his own promising startup that's been making waves in the machine learning space. We met through a tech networking event, and it seemed like we had everything figured out, both successful in our careers, deeply in love, and planning our future together. The venue of our dreams was booked for a beautiful spring ceremony, and my parents, who've always been incredibly supportive of my career and choices, offered to pay for it. I'm particularly close to them, both retired professors who encouraged me to pursue my ambitions in tech even when it wasn't a common path for women. They've always been my biggest cheerleaders, celebrating every promotion and supporting me through the tough times in my career. We were about to send out invitations by the end of this week, but then Ben completely blindsided me about 10 days ago. He came home late from work, looking unusually serious, and said he needed to discuss something important about the wedding. My first thought was budget concerns or maybe venue issues. Instead, he dropped a bomb. He didn't want my parents at the wedding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. As an only child, the idea of getting married without my parents present seemed unthinkable. My mind immediately went to my dad, who had teared up when we told him about our engagement and who was supposed to walk me down the aisle. I asked Ben to explain, hoping there was some misunderstanding. That's when he revealed that his parents had taken issue with mine. According to him, during our family dinner a few weeks ago, my parents had been disrespectful to his, and now they wanted my parents excluded from the wedding. This made no sense to me. I'd been there at the dinner, and while there had been some discussion about career choices and family dynamics, nothing had seemed particularly heated or disrespectful. Ben's parents come from old money and have very traditional views about family roles. His mother has never worked outside the home, taking pride in being a full-time homemaker. My parents, on the other hand, are both academics who built their careers together, sharing household responsibilities equally throughout their marriage. During dinner, there had been some discussion about work-life balance, but I hadn't noticed any tension. When I tried to discuss this with Ben, pointing out that excluding my parents would be cruel and unnecessary, he became defensive. We had our first major argument about it, voices rising as we went back and forth. In frustration, I suggested that if my parents couldn't attend, we should have a separate ceremony just for them. I was being petty, trying to make a point. The next morning, still angry and hurt, I did something I now regret. I forwarded the venue bill to his parents. My logic was simple. If they were going to dictate who could attend the wedding, they should be willing to pay for it. This was especially frustrating because Ben's parents, despite their wealth, hadn't contributed anything to the wedding costs. Everything was being covered by us and my parents. That evening, things exploded. Ben's parents had called him outraged about my insolent behavior. He came home furious, saying I had no right to force or guilt trip his parents into paying for anything. He demanded I apologize to them immediately. But I stood my ground. If they had the audacity to demand my parents' absence, they should be willing to foot the bill. It was their son's wedding too, after all. For the next 3 days, Ben and I could barely look at each other. The tension in our apartment was unbearable. Every conversation, no matter how it started, somehow circled back to the wedding and our parents. I found myself working late at the office, just to avoid coming home to another argument. Our once peaceful home had become a battleground of silent treatments and heated exchanges. The constant fighting had left me emotionally drained. I started questioning everything about our relationship. How had we gone from planning our future together to barely being able to stay in the same room? I began seriously considering calling off the wedding. The thought made me physically ill, but continuing like this seemed impossible. Then, on the third night, something shifted. Ben came home with takeout from my favorite Thai place, a peace offering. He admitted his parents were being unreasonable and said we could work things out if we stuck together. He acknowledged that this was supposed to be our day, and we both deserved to have our parents there. His apology seemed sincere, and I felt some of the tension leave my body. We agreed to give the situation some time to cool down. We'd avoid discussing it for a few days since arguing clearly wasn't helping. I truly believed his apology was genuine. I should have known better. Looking back, I realize I was naive to think he'd let go of what he saw as an insult to his parents. A week passed in this uneasy truce. We went through the motions of normal life, working, having dinner together, watching our favorite shows, but there was an undercurrent of tension we couldn't shake. Then came last night's bombshell. Ben came home looking smug, almost satisfied. He announced that he'd canceled our venue booking and decided we'd have the wedding in our backyard instead. His logic? Now that there was no venue to pay for, we didn't need my parents at the wedding at all. He actually seemed proud of this solution. as if he'd solved some complex puzzle. I stood there in our kitchen, completely stunned. The betrayal hit me in waves. First, the shock that he'd canceled our dream venue without consulting me. Then, the realization that he thought my parents' only value to our wedding was financial. And finally, the absurdity of his backyard solution, our rental property with its tiny yard that barely fits a grill, let alone a wedding. The argument that followed was nuclear. I told him I couldn't care less what his parents liked. These were my parents, and I didn't need anyone's permission to have them at my wedding. I said if he didn't make this right immediately, the wedding was off. That's when his true colors finally showed. He laughed, actually laughed, and said I could go ahead and cancel everything. He admitted he hadn't felt like getting married since I insulted his parents by sending them the bill. The venue had taken a week to confirm the cancellation, and he'd been waiting for that before revealing his true feelings. The past few days of reconciliation had been an act, calculated to hurt me as much as possible. 2 years of my life, gone in an instant. I felt like I was moving through a fog as I packed my essentials into an overnight bag. The most devastating part wasn't even his betrayal, it was his complete indifference as I walked out the door. He didn't try to stop me, didn't show any emotion at all. He just sat there, scrolling through his phone like it was any other evening. I drove to my parents' house in a daze, tears making the familiar route dangerous. They were surprised to see me at that hour, but one look at my face told them something was seriously wrong. It took several attempts and a lot of tissues before I could hoping to protect them and fix things myself. My mom held me while I cried, and my dad made his special hot chocolate, just like when I was a kid having a bad day. They were clearly angry about how Ben had treated me, but they focused on comforting me rather than expressing their own feelings. I could tell they were holding back from saying what they really thought about Ben and his parents. I haven't been able to eat anything since last night, and sleep seems impossible. Every time I close my eyes, I see Ben's indifferent face as I walked out. I keep wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Should I have just apologized to his parents? Should I have seen this coming sooner? The worst part is that I still love him, even though I'm trying desperately not to. 2 years of sharing a life together doesn't just disappear overnight. I catch myself reaching for my phone to text him about random things, forgetting for a moment that everything has changed. I know I made a mistake in sending that bill to his parents. It was petty and provocative, but I never imagined it would lead to this level of calculated revenge. Was this who he really was all along? Had I been blind to his true nature, or did this situation bring out a side of him I'd never seen before? Tomorrow I'll need to start canceling vendors and telling people the wedding is off. But right now, I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of simpler times, wondering how I'm supposed to move forward from here. Update 1. I've been staying with my parents for 3 days now, and I finally learned what actually happened at that fateful dinner where my fiancé's parents found mine really rude. I needed to understand this crucial piece of the puzzle, so I asked my parents to tell me exactly what transpired during the brief period when Ben was out smoking and I was in the kitchen opening wine. Apparently, Ben's mother started praising me for upholding traditional values by doing all the kitchen work that evening. She even proudly declared that she'd never allowed her son or husband to step foot in the kitchen throughout their lives. What she didn't know was that Ben and I had always shared cooking duties, something I'd mentioned to my parents with pride because it reflected our equal partnership. My parents, being the straightforward academics they are, actually laughed at her assumption. They explained that I was only in the kitchen that day because I chose to cook, but usually Ben and I take turns. This was something I'd shared with them proudly because it represented the balanced relationship we'd built. This revelation utterly shocked Ben's parents. They tried to argue that my parents must be mistaken, but my parents stood firm. They went further, explaining that they'd be disappointed if I took on all household responsibilities alongside my demanding tech career just because I'm a woman. They emphasized their belief in a balanced marriage where partners share responsibilities equally. According to my mom, Ben's parents' faces completely changed at this point. They made what she described as society page smiles, polite but cold, and refused to engage further in the conversation. My parents realized they'd offended them but didn't think it was serious enough to mention to me. They thought that since I was marrying Ben, not his parents, everything would be fine as long as he and I were aligned in our values. What's really hitting me now is how this explains so many subtle tensions I'd noticed but dismissed. The way Ben's mother would make pointed comments about career women during our visits. How his father would praise Ben for letting me continue working after marriage. I'd always brushed these off as generational differences, but now I see they were expecting me to eventually conform to their traditional values. The most painful realization isn't just that Ben sided with his parents, it's that he might have shared their views all along. Was he expecting me to eventually quit my job? Did he resent that I earned more than him? Was our supposed equal partnership just temporary in his mind? These past few days have given me clarity about something else too. When Ben's parents demanded my parents' exclusion from the wedding, It wasn't just about that one dinner conversation. They were trying to assert control over our future family dynamic. By showing they could exclude my parents from major family events, they were establishing their authority over our lives. I'm grateful to my parents for keeping quiet initially. They were trying to keep the peace. But knowing this context now, I don't think telling me earlier would have changed much. If anything, it would have just brought forward the inevitable breakup. The fundamental issue wasn't just about wedding guests or venue payments, it was about deeply incompatible values and expectations. Looking back, there were so many red flags I ignored. The way Ben would tense up when I talked about my career goals. His hesitation when I suggested we split all expenses equally. His discomfort when I earned a promotion that put my salary above his. I'd attributed it all to startup stress or temporary insecurities, but maybe these were signs of his true beliefs. In a way, what happened was for the best. Ben's parents had always maintained a polite facade with me, but I'm certain that would have changed after marriage. Their masks slipped during that dinner conversation, showing their true expectations. Better to discover this now than after we were legally bound together. While I'm still heartbroken, I'm starting to accept that Ben isn't the right person for me. A man who could systematically plan to hurt me over a perceived slight to his parents isn't someone I want to build a life with. A partner who would exclude my parents from our wedding isn't someone who truly respects me or my family. I'm trying to focus on the bullet I dodged rather than the time I lost. Yes, it hurts now, but imagine discovering these attitudes 5 years into a marriage, maybe with children involved. At least now I can make a clean break and rebuild my life on my own terms. Update 2. It's been almost a week since I left, and today I finally went back to get all my things from Ben's house. I'd been avoiding this moment, preferring to stay in my parents' guest room with just the essentials I'd grabbed that night. But with my lease ending soon on my part of the rent, I knew I couldn't postpone it any longer. Arriving at what used to be our shared home felt surreal. All those mornings rushing to get ready for work, evening Netflix sessions, weekend brunches, now just memories in a place that suddenly felt foreign. I brought empty boxes and a determination to get through this as quickly as possible. Ben was there when I arrived, but he might as well have been a piece of furniture. He didn't acknowledge my presence beyond a brief glance when I walked in. The silence was deafening as I moved through the house, packing away 2 years of my life. It was strange how items I'd use daily, my coffee mug, my favorite throw blanket, my desk setup, now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. The most difficult part was sorting through our shared items. The matching Sunnyvale Power Couple mugs his sister had given us as an engagement gift. The framed photo from our startup networking event where we first met. The extensive cookbook collection we'd built together during lockdown. Each item carried memories that now felt tainted. As I was carefully wrapping our jointly purchased smart home devices, I found myself wondering about the algorithms we'd programmed together. Would he the morning routine that automatically started my favorite playlist and adjusted the kitchen lights to my preferred brightness? Or would he leave those little pieces of me in the system, ghost protocols running in an empty house? I didn't ask for his help with the packing, and he didn't offer. The only sound was the rustling of bubble wrap and the occasional thud of boxes being filled. I found myself moving with mechanical precision, channeling all my project management skills into this final task, categorizing, organizing, efficiently filling boxes with mathematically optimal arrangements of items. After about an hour, when I was almost finished, Ben finally broke his silence. But it wasn't to apologize or even to say goodbye, it was to discuss splitting the wedding cancellation costs. He had already calculated everything down to the last cent, including the non-refundable deposits and cancellation fees. His voice was businesslike, as if we were discussing a failed merger rather than our broken engagement. The conversation was brief and eerily professional. I agreed to send him a check by the end of the week for my half of the expenses. It felt strange to reduce our relationship to a series of financial transactions, but maybe that's what we've been doing all along. Trying to quantify love and commitment in terms of venue deposits and shared rent. Just before I left, he surprised me by wishing me luck for the future. The words seemed to catch us both off guard, a moment of humanity breaking through the carefully maintained facade of indifference. I wished him the same, more out of reflex than genuine feeling. As I drove away with my car full of boxes, I found myself thinking about our different perspectives on the future. I now realized that while I saw our marriage as a partnership of equals, his family viewed it as my integration into their traditional hierarchy. My parents' comments at that dinner had inadvertently exposed this fundamental incompatibility. Looking at our old apartment building in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. I'll miss the life we built there, the morning coffee runs, the late-night coding sessions, the weekend farmers market visits. But I won't miss walking on eggshells around his parents' expectations or compromising my values to maintain peace. I don't know if Ben's parents know about the wedding being called off yet. Given their views on our relationship and the dinner incident, I imagine they're probably relieved. Now that I understand what was said between them and my parents, I realized their traditional values would never have aligned with my vision of marriage. They likely wouldn't have approved of me maintaining my career post-marriage, let alone sharing household responsibilities equally with their son. Back in my childhood bedroom, unpacking these boxes feels like unpacking my assumptions about relationships. I'm starting to see how Ben's silence about his true beliefs was a form of deception. His parents' views on gender roles in marriage weren't just generational quirks, they were expectations he ultimately chose to uphold. The coding books we bought together, the tech conference swag we collected, the prototypes we brainstormed, all these shared items now feel like props from a play where we were both acting different parts. Methodically organizing these belongings in my temporary space, I'm reminded that sometimes the hardest bugs to fix are the ones in our own assumptions about love and compatibility. Update 3. After 3 weeks of virtual isolation, working from home and avoiding all social contact beyond my parents and immediate teammates, I finally had to start letting our friends know about the breakup. I know I should have done this sooner, but dealing with the breakup itself consumed all my emotional energy. Even my daily stand-up meetings were a struggle, requiring me to put on a professional facade while feeling completely broken inside. Last night, I finally responded to the mounting pile of texts from our shared social circle. Ben and I had attended the same tech university but didn't know each other. Then we connected years later through professional networking. This shared alumni network meant we had several mutual friends, including my best friend Victoria from the computer science program. To most friends, I sent brief, professionally worded messages explaining that due to irreconcilable differences, the wedding was off. I used the most corporate language possible, treating it like a press release about a failed merger. It felt safer that way, more controlled, less likely to trigger the emotional breakdown I was barely keeping at bay. But with Victoria, it was different. Over a lengthy video call, I told her everything. The dinner incident, Ben's manipulation, his parents' traditional expectations, and the calculated revenge with the venue cancellation. She was shocked, especially given Ben's reputation in our tech circle as a progressive startup founder who championed women in tech. The disconnect between his public persona and private beliefs hit her particularly hard because she'd recently accepted a position as a technical advisor for his startup. After hearing the full story, Victoria resigned from her advisory role, citing ethical concerns about working with someone who could be so manipulative and traditional in their personal views while maintaining a progressive public image. This morning, I received angry messages from Ben, accusing me of deliberately sabotaging his company's reputation. Victoria's resignation had apparently triggered concerns among other team members, particularly the female engineers. Now he's demanding that I post a joint statement he's written, similar to those carefully worded celebrity divorce announcements. The draft reads like a startup's damage control press release, all about mutual respect and different paths, with no mention of his deliberate manipulation or his family's traditional expectations. I'm not posting this sanitized version of events. First, it completely absolves him of any wrongdoing. Second, we hadn't even sent out wedding invitations. Our ceremony was meant to be intimate, with just close friends and family. I've already personally informed everyone who needed to know. His insistence on controlling the narrative, even after our breakup, shows the same pattern of manipulation that characterized the end of our relationship. He's more concerned about maintaining his image as a progressive tech leader than acknowledging how his actions contributed to our breakup. This situation has made me realize how much of our relationship might have been performance art, him playing the role of a progressive partner while harboring traditional expectations. Update 4. It's been a month and a half since my last update, and while I'm doing much better now, there's been some intense drama I need to share. The situation with Ben escalated dramatically after I refused to post his carefully crafted breakup announcement. He showed up at my parents' house, demanding to talk about damage control. When I refused to cooperate with his narrative management plans, he completely lost control. Standing in my parents' living room, he started ranting about how I was destroying his company's reputation and ruining relationships he'd spent years building in the tech community. The conversation quickly turned hostile. When I told him that I didn't owe him anything, particularly not protection of his carefully curated public image, he became furious. He started yelling about how I was trying to ruin his reputation out of spite because he dumped me. The irony of him showing up at my parents' house, the same parents he'd tried to exclude from our wedding, wasn't lost on me. Things took a darker turn when he punched the wall next to my parents' family photos, leaving a significant dent. It was such a stereotypical display of toxic masculinity that I almost laughed, but instead, I called the police. They arrived quickly, and Ben's parents had to bail him out. That's when his parents launched their own campaign against me. That very night, they sent me a threatening email claiming they would ensure I landed in prison for allegedly harassing their son. His mother even started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for a defamation lawsuit against me. The irony of them being wealthy enough to afford legal fees but choosing to crowdfund instead wasn't lost on our friends. The GoFundMe description painted me as a vindictive ex-fiancé trying to destroy their family dynamics. They claimed I was attempting to drive a wedge between Ben and his parents because they had traditional family values. Our tech community friends quickly shut this down, reporting the campaign for harassment. I'd blocked Ben and his parents on all platforms after the police incident, so I relied on friends to keep me updated about their attempts to smear my reputation. They were putting considerable effort into making me look like someone who was trying to ruin Ben's relationship with his parents through radical feminist ideas. The several female founders who'd previously considered partnerships with his startup quietly backed away. The situation reached its breaking point when Ben made a public post claiming my parents had raised me to be a lazy narcissist with no values. After everything, trying to exclude my parents from our wedding, showing up at their house, punching their wall, this was the final straw. I unblocked him and called him directly, making it clear that he could either take down all his posts or face legal consequences. Unlike his parents' empty threats, I wasn't bluffing. He must have heard the determination in my voice because, despite his initial resistance, he removed all the posts that same day. The tech community is relatively small, and word travels fast. Several of our mutual connections have quietly distanced themselves from Ben's startup, seeing his behavior as a red flag for potential business relationships. It's ironic that his attempts to protect his reputation ended up damaging it far more than our simple breakup ever could have. It's been 2 weeks since any contact with Ben or his family, and I'm finally feeling like I can breathe again. I'm focusing on my career, leading my team through a major project launch, and slowly rebuilding my social life without the shadow of Ben's drama hanging over me. This experience has taught me a lot about the difference between public personas and private values, especially in the tech industry where image often seems to matter more than substance. I've learned to trust my instincts more and to value authenticity over carefully curated appearances. For now, I'm taking things day by day. My team has been incredibly supportive and I'm channeling my energy into mentoring other women in tech, hoping to create genuine change rather than just paying lip service to progressive values.